You leave the conversation, and almost immediately something shifts. Not collapse, not anger, not a feeling you could easily name, just a drop, a heaviness settling into your chest that wasn't there before, like your body finally got permission to be honest now that no one is watching. Nothing bad happened, no argument, no insult. From the outside, it probably looked fine, maybe even warm. You listened, you answered, you stayed present, you got through it. But now that you're alone, you feel hollowed out. Your thoughts get louder. Your chest feels tighter. You replay small moments that didn't seem worth remembering. A certain tone, a pause that lasted a beat too long, a question that sounded harmless but didn't feel harmless, a moment where you were still talking, but something inside you had already quietly left the room. That's the part that unsettles you most. You can't point to one clear thing, no obvious offense, no clean evidence, so you do what most people do. You start doubting yourself. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe nothing was wrong and the problem is me. Because how do you explain that someone can be warm, friendly, even kind, and still leave you feeling like something in you got quietly worn down? Most people want a simple answer to that. They want a label: good person, bad person, toxic, safe, and sometimes those labels help. Some people really are manipulative, self-absorbed, or destabilizing in obvious ways. But the people who exhaust you most are often not that easy to categorize. They're not always cruel. They're not always dramatic. Sometimes they're perfectly likable on the surface. And that's exactly why the exhaustion is so hard to trust. Because being drained isn't always about open conflict. Sometimes it's about invisible effort. The real cost isn't what someone does to you in any obvious sense. It's what being around them quietly requires from you. That's where the truth usually begins. There are people around whom you stay intact. Your thoughts feel like your own. Your face feels natural. Silence isn't a threat. You don't have to manage how you're landing every 30 seconds. And then there are people around whom some part of you is always working, watching, editing, softening, anticipating. You choose words more carefully. You hold back certain reactions. You track the emotional tone and adjust before anything even goes wrong. Maybe they get defensive easily. Maybe everything circles back to them. Maybe honesty feels expensive around them, so without deciding to, you start shaping yourself into a version that creates less friction. You don't notice how much effort that takes while it's happening. You notice afterward, when the fatigue hits. This is why nice and restful are not the same thing. Someone can be polite and still leave you tense. Someone can mean well and still make you feel crowded. Someone can be warm and still keep your nervous system quietly on alert. A lot of exhaustion in relationships isn't about cruelty. It's about emotional labor. It's about how much of the interaction you're carrying invisibly. Reading moods, filling silences, keeping the atmosphere stable. Translating yourself into a version that creates less friction. Some people never ask for that directly. They just create an environment where you start doing it automatically. And once you do it automatically, it becomes almost invisible. You just leave tired. That's when the pattern starts revealing itself, not in the moment, but in the aftermath. You notice how certain names on your phone make your body drop before you even answer. You notice how some visits leave you needing silence for the rest of the day. You notice that certain people don't have to insult you to leave you feeling smaller, foggier, less connected to yourself. You notice that being with them feels less like contact and more like management. That's a hard thing to admit, especially when the person matters to you. These aren't strangers, they're family, old friends, people with history, people you care about. So instead of listening to your exhaustion, you argue with it. They're going through a lot. I should be more patient. This is just what relationships take. And yes, everyone is tiring sometimes. No relationship is easy all the time. But there's a difference between that and the kind of interaction where your whole system quietly braces just to stay connected. That difference matters. Some people drain you through unpredictability. You never know which version of them you're about to meet. Warm or cold, open or offended, fine or fragile. Even when the shifts are subtle, your body starts scanning for them, preparing, trying to stay one step ahead of the emotional weather. That low-level vigilance is exhausting, especially if you learned that habit early. If you grew up around people whose moods controlled the room, certain personalities will tire you out faster than others, not because you're weak, because your nervous system learned to read changes quickly, and some people trigger that old skill immediately. You don't relax around them, you monitor around them. Others drain you by pulling you back into a role you've been quietly trying to outgrow. Around them, you become the calm one, the strong one, the listener, the one who absorbs and explains and keeps things from getting awkward. Nobody formally assigned you that role. It just formed over time. But once it becomes familiar, people stop noticing how much it costs you. They just assume that's who you are. That's where exhaustion starts quietly turning into resentment. Not because you suddenly hate them, but because some part of you knows you're disappearing again. You're being useful but not fully known, needed but not fully met, present but not fully real. And that's when the deeper truth starts surfacing. You don't feel free around them. That realization can be painful, not because it makes the other person a villain, but because it forces you to admit something you may have been avoiding for a long time. Some relationships don't hurt you through drama. They hurt through erosion, through repetition, through the quiet habit of asking you to leave yourself just enough to keep the connection smooth. There's no big event, no clean cause, no moment dramatic enough to justify how drained you feel. Just a pattern where one person leaves lighter and the other leaves carrying the residue. A pattern where one person gets access and the other absorbs the cost. A pattern you keep calling normal because the truth feels too inconvenient to say out loud. But eventually, something in you gets tired of the performance, and that's where clarity begins. Not through blame, not through a dramatic cutoff, not by deciding everyone who drains you is toxic. Clarity begins when you stop asking whether your reaction is valid enough and start asking a better question. Who do I become around this person? Do I stay connected to myself or do I start performing? Do I feel more like myself afterward or less? Do I leave clearer or more scrambled, calmer or more defended? That's the real test, because a person doesn't have to be malicious to be too expensive for your inner life. That truth can feel almost radical when you first let it in. You realize you don't need courtroom evidence to trust your own depletion. You don't need a dramatic offense to justify distance. You don't need to turn someone into a monster before you're allowed to protect your energy. Sometimes the only thing you need to know is this: I leave these interactions feeling worse than I arrived. That's information, real information. And once you stop overriding it, something starts shifting, quietly at first. You answer a little slower. You explain yourself a little less. You stop volunteering for roles that always leave you empty. You become a little less loyal to the appearance of connection, and a little more loyal to your actual experience inside it. That's not cruelty, that's self-respect. And here's the part that's almost relieving. The goal is not to become cold, not to cut everyone off, not to analyze every relationship until no one feels safe enough. The goal is to become honest. Honest about what your energy actually pays for. Honest about which dynamics quietly shrink you. Honest about where your body is working overtime just to stay present. Because once you become honest, you also start recognizing something else. The right people aren't perfect. They still have moods. They still have needs. They'll still be difficult sometimes. But they don't make your whole system strain just to stay connected. Around them, even hard conversations still contain space. You don't feel constantly edited. You don't leave wondering where you went. You remain yourself. And maybe that's what this kind of exhaustion is actually pointing you toward. Not bitterness, not distance from everyone, just accuracy. The ability to stop calling every draining dynamic normal. The willingness to admit when a connection costs more than it gives back. The courage to recognize that peace in a relationship is not a luxury. It's information. Sometimes the exhaustion isn't there to make you cynical. Sometimes it's there to make you honest. If this felt familiar, drop a comment below. What drains you most? Someone's unpredictability, their self-focus, the emotional labor they create, or the version of yourself you become around them? And if you want more of this kind of content, subscribe. New video every week.